recording. So there are two major types of risks we face when you are doing project management in projects. So they are actually positive risks and negative risks. So generally risk is we can't predict the risk. I mean, not predict actually. We can't actually planning, we can't avoid or overcome or control. So there are uncertain events. So normally a general definition is an uncertainty that can have a negative or positive effect. So the risks that have negative effects, we call them negative risks. And the risks that have positive effects, we call them positive risks. So then after that, we discuss mainly about risk event occurring, the chances and the cost associated. So what you need to grab from here, actually, you need to identify from this graph that chances of risk occurring is higher in the early time of the project, and later the chance of risk occurrence reduces while cost to fix risk event increases. So these are the main processes in risk management. So we discussed until quantitative risk analysis. So today we'll be discussing about risk response planning and risk monitoring and control. So risk management planning is the thing we are doing at the first place. So we decide how we are going to do this process, how we are going to manage a risk. And then we find what are the risks available. And the third step is qualitative risk analysis. Risks would be qualitatively and quantitatively analyzed. So in qualitative analysis, as you may remember, we develop a prioritized list of risks. So we identify the risks and prioritize the risks according to the quality, according to the effect actually, and the damage you can have from that risk. So then quantitative risk analysis does some measures, give some numbers of the quantity of the harmfulness or effect from the risk. And then we decide the actions after that, what we need to do. Can we avoid it? Can we reduce the effect happened by that risk? So likewise, we decide actions, what we can do after that. And then risk monitoring and controlling process would be done throughout the project, looking at whether we are on the plan we have decided at the first step, and then continuing identifying the new risks and managing them. So we discuss about the benefits and the major components of a risk management plan, and what are contingency fallback plans. And then we categorize the risks. These are actually according to the relatedness. So related to market, it's called market risk. If the risk is related with financial something, it's called financial risk. If it is related with technology, we call it a technology risk. And if it is related with people, we call it a people risk. And if the risk is originated from the structure or process involved, we call it a structure or process risk. So the risk breakdown structure actually is a hierarchy of risk categories. So this is one example of some risk breakdown structure. You can see risks are categorized according to the type and then identified using this breakdown structure. Okay, so first thing is risk identification. So in this process, we can use these tools, brainstorming, the Delphi technique, interweaving, and software analysis. I think we went through each and every these methods. So what is brainstorming? It's a group attempt. So there are some experienced facilitate. There should be an experienced facilitator, plus there should be experienced people to come up with good suggestions. Okay, so here actually in brainstorming session, so it's a verbal one. So we try to generate ideas by exchanging ideas in a group. We have a facilitator as well, so he would help us not to be biased. Okay, so when we compare brainstorming with Delphi, the main difference is Delphi, it's trying to derive a consensus among a panel of experts, while in brainstorming, it's not like that. So the people are having different ideas. So we are trying to come out to a solution using those ideas. So most of the times, this Delphi technique is preferred mainly because it is actually, we don't actually communicate orally, so there's less biasness happens here in Delphi technique. And in interviewing, it's, face-to-face communication is the best best method of interviewing. However, we also have phone interviews, email, and instant messaging discussions also these days. So in holding an interview, always it's preferred to have a set of good questions. So it would be there as a guide to the interview. So we'll be able to interview people with similar project experience. So they would give their experience and we can ask questions, related doubts. So it's a very successful method in risk identification if we meet a very good experienced person in a similar project. In SWOT analysis, we try to identify these 4 things in a project: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So in risk identification, we can assume that positive risks are strengths identified by strengths and opportunities, while the negative risks can be identified by the weaknesses and threats. So a risk register is a document which would contain the result of risk management processes. So it's a tool for documenting risk events. I think I have a sample here. So in this sample, you can see the first row, how it is filled in this way. So there's a number given, rank given. Rank gives the priority according to the qualitative risk analysis we did earlier. Okay. And the risk is identified and the description is given. What is the risk associated with this particular occasion? And then there should be category, one of the categories we mentioned previously. And there should be root cause and triggers. And we have to think about a good risk response as well. So there's this risk owner and the probability and the impact. So qualitative risk analysis is we prioritize the risks according to the basically on probability of occurrence and the impact that would have on the project by this risk is identified. And you can see at this corner the risks which have highest impact and the highest probability is identified at the top right-hand corner, as you can see. So this is another way of doing this qualitative risk analysis. So you can see how a rank is given, and top 10 items are always revised monthly. You can see the last month's rank, and how this particular risk became number 1, being at number 2 and number 4 in the previous months. So this is a periodic review. So it's a very good process because you look at all the risks once a month. So in quantitative risk analysis, so we try to give a number for the risk. So decision tree analysis is one of the very popular ways of quantitative risk analysis. So you can see here, so this EMV value is calculated. So this is one of the ways you can do it. So we can use a decision tree and we can use EMV method to give it a number to associate to the associated monetary value of the particular event. So you can see, so this is particularly applied for project selection, this particular example. However, this particular example, it's like so they are outsourcing. So they are trying, not outsourcing, they are trying to buy off the shelf software. There are 2 options and 2 of the self softwares available, and the other way around you can do is you can code by yourself. So for that, so there's a percentage given, the probability of success percentage, and the expected profits if you use the particular way of doing that. So, so this is one example. So in this example, it's this decision tree method is applied to decide what to do. I mean, which software to choose, or whether it whether you can code, what is the best option we can do. So there are risks associated. So so that is a very good method. You can come up with some decision to your risk tolerance. And I think this is the point we stopped last week. So risk response planning is actually very important, because now we know how to identify a risk and how to prioritize the risk according to the quality, and how quantitatively give some value to a particular risk. So after doing this identification and qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis, you can decide, I mean, for some risks, we may not be able to go for quantitative analysis. So it depends on the situation you use. So there are 4 main response categories for the negative risks. So if you look at negative risks and positive risks, so there are different response categories. It should be, isn't it? So we can't treat positive risks in the same way as we do in negative risks, because we like positive risks to happen. Negative risks, we don't care actually, not care actually. We can't do the same as we do for positive risks. We enhance the probability. We would like to enhance the probability of occurrence of a positive risk. Rather than negative risk, we don't like it to happen, because the circumstances of having problem associated with negative risks, because that's the reason. So the response strategies are like this. So there are 4 main strategies: risk avoidance, risk acceptance, risk transference, and risk mitigation. So what is avoidance? We can avoid a negative risk. So as an example, assume that we need to decide on a software or hardware to buy or use. Okay. So if you are unfamiliar with it, so there's a risk that whole project would fail because of choosing the incorrect software. Okay. So the choosing the correct software is actually very important. So it's a risk. It's a risky thing. If we choose some software which is very new but unfamiliar, there's a risk that the whole project would not succeed. So how can you avoid this risk? So you have to identify the risk. What is the risk? There's a risk that the whole project would not succeed if we use this negative, if we actually do this thing, use a new but unfamiliar software. Okay. By risk avoidance, actually what we can do it, we would not use any software which is very unfamiliar with us, or we may not use any hardware which is unfamiliar to us. Okay, we are going to use very familiar, widely used software and hardware. So then we have avoided that risk. So normally, so this widely used software, most of the bugs are resolved. So because of that reason, that risk would not occur. Okay, so that's the first thing, first response strategy. So although I tell that it's the first risk response strategy, there's no any priority. Okay, you can go for any, and there's no any priority list of response strategies. They all are independent. So the second one is risk acceptance. So we are going to accept it. So if this risk happens, let it happen. But we have some backup plans and contingency resource, some money allocated to come up with a solution. Okay. So we have identified the solution as well from the backup plan, and we have some allocated money to repair the harm that happened to the project. Okay. So that is called risk acceptance. And the risk transference is to deal with financial risk exposure. A company may purchase special insurance, like we transfer the risk for the other company. Like when you're driving a vehicle, accidents would happen, and then the damage need to be covered up by some amount of money. What you do is you give that responsibility for a insurance company. It's something like that. There are companies that would get that risk. Risk transference does is we transfer that to another particular organization or a company. So an example is given. A company may purchase special insurance for specific hardware, and if the hardware fails, insurer has to replace it. So something like that. And risk mitigation is the fourth response strategy. So here we reduce the probability of occurrence. Okay, we use proven technology, and we buy the maintenance or service contracts. So then we mitigate the risk. So we have reduced the probability of occurrence. So when you use the proven, widely used technology, most of the bugs in those technologies are resolved. So there's a low probability that there would be problems in the technology used. So that's how we can mitigate the risk. Okay. So to understand these four response strategies, so I have a small cartoon here. This is extracted from a resource in the internet. So you can, so what you can see here is your project is risky. Always you will meet risks. So you're on a cliff. So you can see you have come to the end of the cliff, and what you are going to do. So you can actually, when you have to do a decision, so these are the four things you can do. You can avoid, you can mitigate, you can transfer, or you can accept. In avoiding, what you do is you go there and turns back. You're not going to go through it. Okay, so that is avoidance. And in mitigation, you are trying to reduce the harm that can happen from the project. So you're jumping onto a this kind of bumpy thing. So you will not get the harm to the extent you would get if you jump to the ground. Okay. So in the next one is transference. You are giving some money for another person and asking another person to go over the cliff rather than going by yourself. So there is transference, and the acceptance is without doing anything, just jumping out of the cliff. So you should have some backup plans and reserves to resolve or repair the harm or the damage occurred by this risk. So what you want you to do now is, I will put you, I will pause recording for a while. Okay, so this should give you general risk mitigation strategies, particularly for these three types: technical risks, cost risks, and schedule risks. You can see you can use WBS and CPM in all of these risk types to mitigate the risk types. Okay, you can use a good plan WBS and CPM method so that you can mitigate this technical risk, cost risk, and schedule risk. And you can, in speaking about technical risk, you can emphasize team support and avoid standalone project structures, and you can increase project managers' authority and also improve problem handling and communication in this in your group, among your group members, and increase the frequency of project monitoring. So increasing the monitoring always would you would be able to mitigate any risks. Okay, and so that is also, you can see two things are repeated. One thing is use WBS and CPM, and the other one is increase the frequency of project monitoring. Okay. So we talked about negative risks. So how about positive risks? How can you respond to a positive risk? So here in the negative risk, we try to avoid, though we try to minimize the effects from those risks. However, in positive risks, it's not like that. We try to enhance the effect from the risk exploitation, risk sharing, risk enhancement, and risk acceptance. So those are the main strategies we have. So when you look at each of these strategy, you can see it is actually expected to enhance risk occurrence or the effects from the risks. Okay. If you look at risk exploitation, we're trying to exploit the risk. Do whatever you can do to make sure the risk occurs. So let the risk occur. We are trying to maximize the occurrence. Okay, call press conferences to advertise new product, take out ads, so something like that. We are enhancing that. Do whatever to make sure the risk occurs. Okay, and risk sharing means allocate ownership of the risk to another party. We are hiring an outside firm to do your advertising. We are trying to maximally involve in that risk. We try to give it to an advertising company because they do it better than us, because they are specialized in advertising. We allocate ownership of the risk to other party. And risk enhancement is we identify and maximize key drivers of the risk. We identify the risk and we maximize the key drivers. And we encourage you, your employees or users of your product to spread the word of your product. Okay, so that is called risk enhancement. And the risk acceptance is don't take any action with regard to the positive risk. We assume that product will speak itself. It's something like that. You do something and you don't talk about it and let it be there, and it would stand along with its own. Okay, it's risk acceptance. So these are the four main strategies for positive risks. So if you look at these strategies and if you compare this with negative risk strategies, you will identify that here the main great difference is we want the positive risk to happen. Okay, so previously we don't like the negative risk to happen because of the harmfulness of that risk type. And the last process is risk monitoring and controlling, which actually helps to mitigate the risks. So if you do it properly, so this involves executing the risk management process to respond to the risk events. So we are trying to identify new risks. We are looking at the request changes as well, while recommending corrective and preventive actions for the current risks. We identify the new risks while carrying out the project as well. Okay, so so assume that we have planned it properly. We have identified the risks, we have analyzed the risks, and then we have identified the response strategies also. So we are going on with the project as well. Okay. However, then there can be some unplanned risks events as well. Something would occur. How, who knows? Okay. Something you have not identified beforehand would also occur. Okay. So for that, as a response, we should have response strategies also. So workarounds are actually those unplanned responses to risk events that may be done when there are no contingency plans. So when some risk occurs, those risks, if we have not identified previously, there are no plans as a response. Okay. So workarounds are actually named as the workaround are actually those unplanned responses. Okay. So there are some problems here. I think I have put them in the quiz. So otherwise you can do them. I think I have a problem in the you need to do in my next slideshow.